Luxury, velvet and gold. This is what royal life looks like at first glance. But beneath the glittering surface lies a grim reality. For centuries, the fate of empires was decided not in battle, but at the altar. And sometimes these unions were truly shocking, because their heroes were teenagers. Children who had barely learned to write their names married strangers. Some became pawns, some became arbiters of fate, and some were doomed. This video features 6 royal marriages that shook courts, changed the course of history, and left behind a trail of betrayal, ambition, and tragedy. From England to Egypt, from France to Scotland, these are not fairy tales. These are stories of survival in the crown. If you are drawn to stories of power, intrigue, and the fate of monarchs, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel. The first is Catherine of Aragon, a bride by duty and the curse of England. She was only 15, a girl on the threshold of adulthood, crossing a stormy sea to become a wife. But not just any wife, the spouse of the future King of England. Her name was Catherine of Aragon, the youngest daughter of the Catholic monarchs of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, a princess raised on the ideals of empire and faith. She spoke Latin better than many bishops and was sure, like the whole world around her, that her path was blessed by God. But God had other plans. In England, Arthur Tudor, the crown prince, was waiting for her. He was also 15, but he already looked like a fragile shadow of a young man, pale, awkward. They were children. But no one cared. Their marriage was a political masterpiece, an alliance between England and Spain, sealed not by treaties but by teenagers. On November 14, 1501, they were married in St. Paul's Cathedral. Thousands of eyes watched as Catherine, dressed in gold and Spanish lace, stood next to a boy she barely knew. They bowed, they smiled, they were displayed like trophies. But behind those smiles was fear, and something worse, ignorance. Almost immediately after the ceremony, they were sent to Ludlow Castle alone. No mothers, no advisors, just 2 teenagers, left alone to play the roles of monarchs, and of husband and wife. Then came illness. Within months, both Catherine and Arthur were seriously unwell. Fevers, vomiting, coughing up blood. Whatever swept through Ludlow Castle that winter was merciless. And by April 1502, Arthur was gone, dead at just 16. And Catherine, a young widow stranded in a foreign land, descended into grief and uncertainty. Their marriage had lasted less than half a year. Everything changed overnight. No longer a bride with promise, Catherine was now simply the Spanish girl, husbandless, purposeless, her dowry in limbo. And that's when the real political storm began. The question on everyone's mind wasn't how Arthur died. It was whether they'd truly been husband and wife in every sense. Did they consummate the marriage? If so, Catherine could never lawfully wed his brother. But if not, there was still a chance. Catherine swore they hadn't. She insisted the union had never been physically fulfilled, that in the eyes of God she remained pure. It was a risky assertion, but one she stood by, and it saved her. She stayed in England for 7 long years, not quite a prisoner, not quite free. Dependent on royal charity, aging quietly while her destiny hung in question. Until Henry, Arthur's younger brother, came of age. He was 18, she was 23. The 5-year difference now worked in her favor, and this time the marriage was real. And for a while it seemed, so was their happiness. But as the years went by and no male heir arrived, the question Catherine thought had died in Lello rose again, fiercer than ever. That one marriage in their teens, that one mysterious night, would become the spark that shattered England's ties to Rome, split a continent, and forever reshaped monarchy. It all began with a sick boy, a foreign girl, and a wedding never meant to be. 2. Mary, Queen of Scots, a child crowned, and a fragile king. She was only 6 days old when her father passed. With his last breath, Mary Stuart was made Queen of Scotland. A title so heavy it almost broke her before she could even stand. By 5 she was sent to France, not for refuge, but as a calculated move. She'd grow up among royalty, groomed to marry the future king, a pawn dressed in silk and lace. Her betrothed was Francis, the Dauphin of France, a year younger, frail and nervous, always unwell. Together they were royal hostages to history, coached to pose, to curtsy, to fulfill a kingdom's design. In 1558, just 15 years old, Mary married Francis in a lavish ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral. She wore white satin, silver-threaded and shining, otherworldly. The crowd fell silent. She looked like divinity itself. But this wasn't a dream. Francis, shy to the point of agony, physically stunted and sickly, winced at every eye upon him. Mary, in stark contrast, was statuesque, sharp-witted, and well-versed in diplomacy. A foreign queen in a glittering court, where secrets swirled behind brocade and lace. Her marriage wasn't born of love. It was a calculated arrangement. Mary brought something potent to the table, a legitimate claim to the English crown through her Tudor heritage. That made her more than just the Queen of Scots. She was a Catholic lightning rod, a looming shadow over Elizabeth I's Protestant England. When Mary Tudor died and Elizabeth rose to power, Mary Stuart's union with France's heir turned explosive. Her marriage now threatened to upend the delicate balance between kingdoms. Then fate struck. 1 year into their union, King Henry II of France was mortally wounded during a joust. A shattered lance pierced his eye, drenching court silks in blood. A tragic spectacle of splintered bone and royal agony. Francis, barely 15, became king, and with him, Mary ascended as Queen of France, Queen of Scotland, and a looming contender for England's throne. For a flicker in time, she wore 3 crowns. The world watched, anxious. But Francis, frail from the start, faltered. His reign endured only 17 months. An ear infection, or a hidden abscess, ravaged him. He died in agony, his face bloated, breath shallow, nestled in Mary's arms. She was just 17. A widow, a queen twice over, utterly alone. The glittering French court chilled overnight. Catherine de' Medici, Francis's formidable mother, seized power. Mary, a political burden now, was swept aside. She sailed back to Scotland, a land half strange to her, to govern a fractured realm teeming with zealotry, corruption, and betrayal. And from that moment, her life descended into a whirlwind of betrayal, bloodshed, and scandal, each step drawing her closer to the scaffold in England. But it had all started here. 2 teenagers trapped in splendor, cloaked in velvet and expectation, but wielded like chess pieces. A wedding that gave her titles and tore her world apart. 3. Isabella of Valois, a child bride and a king unraveling at the seams. In an era choked with war and disease, peace was as delicate as lace. And sometimes peace came in the form of a little girl. In 1396, in the thick of the 100 Years' War, England and France forged a fragile ceasefire. But parchment alone wouldn't hold it. To seal it, they needed something visible, something human. So they chose a child. Isabella of Valois, daughter of Charles VI of France, descended from kings, carried herself like royalty, with a solemn face and wide, watchful eyes. But she was only 6. Her betrothed, King Richard II of England, a man of 29, already a widower, a ruler besieged by foes and ghosts, chief among them his late wife, Anne of Bohemia. This marriage wasn't born from affection. It was strategy, desperation wrapped in brocade. Richard's grip on power was slipping, his enemies sharpening their blades, and a French alliance might be his final shield. But at a grave price. The match stirred fury, even by medieval standards where love seldom mattered. The sight of a grown monarch wedding a girl barely out of the nursery horrified nobles and disgusted commoners. Still, the wedding proceeded. A grand affair in Calais, where tiny Isabella, dressed in white and gold, was handed to her husband like a ceremonial treaty. Chroniclers recorded how Richard knelt before the frightened girl and whispered, "You are my wife now, and I will be good to you." He vowed not to touch her until she came of age, a promise both strangely kind and chilling in its implications. He took her to England and surrounded her with toys, gemstones, ladies-in-waiting, tutors and dolls. But it wasn't affection, it was theatre. A child bride meant to soothe a restless nation. And for a short time, it worked. The people adored the young French princess. The mood in court brightened. But it was a fragile illusion. Within 2 years, Richard abandoned her to face civil unrest. Henry Bolingbroke, once banished and embittered, returned from exile, gathered allies, and seized power. Richard was overthrown, jailed, and quietly killed. Isabella, just 8 years old, found herself a queen no more. Orphaned of power, too young to understand, she became a political pawn. France begged for her release. England stalled and refused. Eventually she was returned, not as a monarch, not even as a widow, just a forgotten relic of a lost alliance. Later, she remarried, this time for affection, to Charles, Duke of Orleans. But fate was cruel. She died young, only 19, her short life marked by titles, sorrow, and confinement. Her tale is often lost to time, but it matters, because in pursuit of peace, they handed a crown and a child to a doomed king. And in that act, they exposed the harshest truth of medieval royalty. Peace is never free. It always demands a sacrifice. And sometimes that sacrifice is a frightened little girl in brocade and silk. 4. Margaret Beaufort, the girl who would bleed for a crown. History remembers her as the mother of kings, the mastermind of a dynasty, and the quiet force behind the Tudor throne. But once, she was merely a child. Born in 1443 into a nation ripped apart by the Wars of the Roses, Margaret Beaufort entered a world of shifting allegiances, dynastic bloodshed, and deadly ambition. England was fractured, and noble daughters were bargaining chips. At the age of 12, Margaret, only daughter of John Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, and great-granddaughter of John of Gaunt, was offered in marriage to a man who would forever change her destiny. That man was Edmund Tudor, a battle-hardened noble in his mid-20s, seasoned in war and skilled in courtly intrigue. Unlike most, Edmund wasn't just another lord. He was the son of Queen Catherine of Valois and her second husband, the Welsh courtier Owen Tudor, making him the half-brother of King Henry VI. Though born from love, not politics, Edmund had carved out a path to influence, and with the throne in constant peril, he set his sights on legacy. He needed a son, an heir with royal blood, a weapon in the coming storm. There was no romance, no youthful bloom, no space to be a girl. At just 12, Margaret Beaufort was thrust into a role she couldn't understand, much less survive unscathed. Small, slender, and scarcely through childhood, she was far from ready to carry a child. But readiness didn't matter, legacy did. And before her 13th birthday, Margaret was pregnant. 13. The pregnancy was agonizing. Chronicles suggest she nearly died. Some wrote that she couldn't walk without pain. Others said her voice changed, deepened by the suffering, but early on a freezing morning, January 28, 1457, within the grey stone walls of Pembroke Castle, she gave birth to a son, Henry Tudor, her only child, the boy she would shield with every breath, the boy who would become a king and launch a dynasty that would change England forever. Yet the price was steep. The delivery maimed her. Margaret never carried another child. Her body, still that of a young girl, had been torn by the demands of royal ambition. She was a mother, but she had paid with her health, her future, her peace. And as if that weren't enough, her husband Edmund had died before the child's birth, likely of plague, locked away in a Welsh stronghold. So there she was, a widow and a mother before her 14th year. But from this ruin, Margaret Beaufort forged a will of iron. Shrewd, pious, unshakably focused, she became a political titan cloaked in modesty. She married twice more, but on her terms. She never risked pregnancy again. Instead, she built alliances, moved kings like chess pieces, and guarded her son's distant claim from exile. And when fate delivered the throne at Bosworth Field in 1485, it was Margaret's son who emerged victorious. Her son, her triumph, her revenge. She ruled not from a throne but from the shadows. She endowed colleges. She funded religious works. She signed her letters not as a duchess, not as a widow, but as Margaret R., the king's mother. But behind that royal signature stood a girl who had once screamed through labor in a freezing stone chamber, her frail body fighting to bring forth the future of a fractured nation. Her success was clawed from agony, soaked in blood, and shadowed by sacrifice. Margaret Beaufort was not merely the mother of a monarch, she was the girl who suffered to make him one. 5. Marie Antoinette, a teenage bride trapped in a palace of mirrors. She was just 14, a child schooled in elegance, in rooms draped with velvet and crystal, where every motion was choreographed like courtly ballet. He was 15, bashful, uncertain, a boy far more at ease with clocks and quiet than with courtly games. And yet together they were crowned the future of a kingdom on the edge. In 1770, Marie Antoinette of Austria was sent across the Rhine to marry the Dauphin of France, Louis Auguste, heir to the Bourbon throne. It was not love, it was politics, an alliance to bind old enemies, Austria and France, with lace and youthful vows. But under the powdered surfaces and painted smiles, disaster was already smouldering. Marie had come from Schönbrunn Palace, raised with music, sisters, and the formidable intellect of her mother, Empress Maria Theresa, one of Europe's most powerful rulers. But Versailles was no home. It was a golden trap, colder, crueler, ruled by ritual and rank. And before she even glimpsed her husband-to-be, Marie was stripped of everything Austrian: her clothes, her companions, her language, even her beloved dog. She crossed the border as a girl and was reborn in ceremony as the Dauphine of France, every trace of her origin erased. But Louis Auguste was not prepared. Let me know when you're ready to continue with the next section. Socially withdrawn, uneasy in public, and likely burdened by a medical issue that made intimacy difficult, Louis Auguste struggled under the weight of expectation. He was a boy pretending at kingship, and the role didn't fit. For 7 long years, their union remained unconsummated. Versailles buzzed with rumors, pamphlets snickered from Paris to the provinces. Marie, still a teenager, crowned in name but not in power, was branded frivolous, frigid, even adulterous, despite being nothing more than an isolated girl in a palace that felt more like a cage. The whispers sharpened. They called her l'Autrichienne, the Austrian woman, soon twisted into a cruel pun that suggested she was less than French, less than queen. Then in 1774, the old king Louis XV died. Suddenly, at just 20 and 19 years old, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette ascended the throne of France. Children draped in velvet, tasked with saving an empire already splintering at the seams. Deprived of intimacy, desperate for joy, Marie sought escape. Masked balls, towering hairstyles, silks that shimmered in candlelight. Each distraction was also a dagger, drawing resentment from a hungry nation. "Let them eat cake," they said, she sneered, though the words were never hers. Still, the legend stuck. As France drowned in debt, famine gripped the countryside, and the people's patience thinned. The lavish galas, the diamond necklace scandal, the endless indulgence. They became symbols of a monarchy that danced while its people starved. And through it all, the girl who had arrived at 14 remained trapped, not by stone walls, but by image, myth, and suspicion. Revolution came swiftly. The Bastille fell, the monarchy crumbled. In 1793, Marie Antoinette, now 37, walked to the guillotine in a plain white dress. No jewels, no powdered hair, just the ghost of that 14-year-old girl who had once crossed the border and never truly returned. Her teenage marriage was meant to secure peace. Instead, it helped light the fuse of revolution. She came to France as a bride and left as a warning. And Louis Auguste, her shy, reluctant husband, by then King Louis XVI, met the same fate. 9 months before her, he too was led to the scaffold, tried for treason, and executed before a silent crowd. The crown they once wore as children had become too heavy for the world they inherited. 6. Cleopatra, the teenage queen, and her husband-brother. Egypt has always conjured images of gods and gold, but behind the grandeur of the Nile was a brutal truth. Royalty here came with daggers, poison, and sibling marriage. And no one embodied that world more fiercely than Cleopatra VII. She was just 18 years old when she became Queen of Egypt. But she wasn't alone on the throne. Her father's will decreed she marry her brother, Ptolemy XIII, a 10-year-old boy. Yes, you heard that right. An 18-year-old woman married to her 10-year-old brother. This wasn't about love. It wasn't even about tradition. It was about dynasty. For generations, Egypt's Ptolemaic rulers, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals, married their siblings to protect the bloodline. But in reality, it bred only jealousy, madness, and endless civil strife. Cleopatra had no intention of being ruled by a child. From the instant she took the throne, she made her position unmistakable. She had coins struck with her image alone. She issued royal proclamations solely under her own name. She even broke with long-standing convention by learning Egyptian instead of relying solely on Greek, the first of her dynasty to do so. But behind her back, within the ornate walls of Alexandria's royal court, lurked Ptolemy's advisors, calculating men who viewed Cleopatra as a dangerous rival. They manipulated the young king, sowing distrust, spreading lies, and dividing the court. Power fractured. The marriage dissolved. The kingdom teetered. In 49 BCE, Cleopatra was driven out. Disguised, she crossed the harsh desert, raising forces in exile, not to reclaim her title as queen, but to take it by force. Back in the palace, her brother's allies grew overconfident. They believed she was defeated. But they misjudged her, everyone did, until Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt. Cleopatra didn't walk into Caesar's tent. She had herself wrapped in a rug and smuggled in like contraband, then unveiled dramatically at his feet. It was a daring display of wit and strategy. That single moment altered history. Caesar took her side. A war broke out, brother against sister. Ptolemy's army fought Caesar's in the heart of Alexandria. The Nile ran red, and in the end, Ptolemy XIII, just 15 years old, drowned while trying to escape. Cleopatra returned to the throne, this time with no one beside her. She reigned over Egypt alone, later with her son by Julius Caesar, and then with Mark Antony. Her legacy would become legend, an enduring symbol of cunning, charisma, and strength. But it all began with a teenage queen, a boy husband, and a court bent on erasing her. Cleopatra wasn't born iconic. She became so by resisting a dynasty that demanded silence and seizing power instead with wit, steel, and one unforgettable entrance in a rug. Help us keep their memory alive. Subscribe to the channel for more hidden histories of the crown.